Hello, friends. It is the 5th of September. Waiting on some pizzas. So decided to have a talk. We're going to talk about narcotics. That's right. And not just the happy weed, but the Colombian marching powder and the fentanyl and everything else. You know, yesterday we saw Trump administration take out a boat with apparently like 11 guys on it, whether they're fishermen or drug dealers, I don't know. They're 2,000 kilometers, or more than 2,000 kilometers away from the U.S. You know, doubted that boat was going to be making that trip. But it is being used as a pretense to start a war, or at least to try to overthrow the Maduro government. What following effects will go from that, God only knows. And doubtful that Mr. Trump or the people running this, like Rubio, who has a hard-on for Venezuela and Maduro and Castro and everybody else, doubtful that they've ever actually thought this through. They usually don't. One prime example was when the U.S. invaded Iraq, had Saddam murdered, and then found out that the people they placed in power were Shia and allies of Iran, and extended Iran's reach into Iraq, which I'm not saying was a bad thing necessarily, but that's not what the U.S. wanted. Same thing we get now that the U.S. keeps attacking on Russia. Russia becomes a close ally, whether it's the term isn't being officially used, but it's all but in words. Of China and Russia are close together. Oh, how hard we have to beat Russia harder to make sure it goes away from China. Yes, you're dealing with idiots. As the Chinese say, when your only instrument is a hammer, every problem's a nail. So that nail became India. And now India, China, and Russia, three superpowers, Asian and Eurasian superpowers, are allied. Both are close to Russia, and they will soon enough be allied between themselves. Why? Because they have this tendency, people start, once under pressure and threat, people start communicating well before they weren't. And then they start asking, well, why were we fighting? And that usually then comes down to, oh, well, who was getting us to fight? Ah, yeah, that was that guy over there. That guy being Uncle Sam. So, you know, we've got the Trump's screaming about fentanyl. Fentanyl is an extremely dangerous drug. It kills because it doesn't, even in small doses, sooner or later you will OD on fentanyl. Because unlike heroin and other drugs, fentanyl doesn't clear the system totally. There's always a little bit left over. And that little bit left over accumulates over time. So it just builds up and builds up and builds up. And eventually a person, even with small doses, will OD. That's just the way that cookie crumbles. But you know, let's go back to supply and demand. So the U.S., in its typical form, because it also uses this as an excuse to exercise its hegemony over certain governments, is going after supply, not demand. And it can't go after demand because the U.S. government, here's the ugly truth of this. The U.S. government makes money on different levels, makes money off the drug trade. U.S. banks, there's been several articles and there's been stress tests done going back, as I think the first ones I was reading was well over 20 years ago. And basically all major U.S. banks would collapse if they were denied drug money, big drug money. That's where it gets laundered. It all goes right back to the U.S. and gets laundered. And they're making money off of it. So yeah, so there's that. So there's already an incentive system in the U.S. financial system, which is 40% of U.S. GDP, or around that, to support a drug trade. So right off the bat, there's that. Big finance is all behind the drug trade. The deep state is behind the drug trade. Do we remember the two CIA cover-ups? The first one was Vietnam, out of Cambodia. The CIA was narco-trafficking inside the corpses of dead American soldiers, heroin. CIA agents would get to the body first, take out the packets of heroin from inside the corpse, and then give the corpse for burial to the family. So that's one. And that was busted, and they put some a minor director out, hung him by his balls like a piñata, and let everybody take a whack at him because he was the mastermind behind all of it. And then there's the Iran-Contra affair, which possibly helped spark the crack epidemic in the U.S. That's where the CIA was importing cocaine. It was selling the cocaine in the U.S. Crack epidemic happened to be just about that time. Getting money from that, buying weapons from Iran, of all places, with that money, and then delivering those weapons to the Contras to fight the El Salvadoran government. The Iran-Contra affair. Again, the same thing. They set up a couple minor directors to be the fall guys, the piñatas for the press and for the public, and then it was all swept under the rug. And the ill-gotten funds, because believe me, they were all getting at least some ill-gotten funds, and all stayed in those pockets, and those people retired very happy and rich. So then we jump forward, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. Say what you want about the Taliban, but for Taliban, narcotics, drugs, are the evil of all evils. Well, pretty damn close to it. They execute drug dealers, they execute any soldiers cut on drugs, as opposed to the Afghan army that the U.S. was setting up, which collapsed in under a week. Remember, the Afghan army the Soviet Union set up lasted 3 years in continuous fighting and collapsed only because Yeltsin, now that the Soviet Union was gone, Yeltsin stopped funding them with weapons, fuel, etc., ammunition. Otherwise, they wouldn't have collapsed. So, but the U.S. Army, the U.S. set up, Petraeus was the guy in charge of that, set up, it was gone. It was gone in under a week. And most of them were drug dealers, or druggies, they weren't drug dealers. So Russia several times asked the U.S. to stop the flow of heroin out of Afghanistan, because as soon as the U.S. took over in Afghanistan, they brought in the new equipment, the fertilizers, and you started having record crops. Almost every single year was a new record crop during the American occupation of Afghanistan. And there are literally photos of American soldiers guarding opium fields, poppy fields. And when the Russian government asked them to stop, because it's flowing through Tajikistan up into Russia and then into Europe from Russia, the answer from NATO was, we don't want to upset the locals. But then you got to ask yourself, where did all that heroin go? I mean, some of it obviously went to the illicit drug trade, but not all of it. Not when there was record crops of morphine, or poppies in this case. Where did all that heroin go? Oh, it went to the U.S., except it went legally to the U.S. And it got stamped out in pills, written out by prescription. And those doctors were getting kickbacks off those prescriptions, writing those pills left and right. I mean, I had a knee operation done in the U.S. in 2010. Came back, got stuck for about 2 weeks, so I went and did a knee operation because the U.S. Army screwed me over and that, and I had wound up paying out of pocket, no insurance. So they gave me a prescription on basically morphine-based tablets. I don't remember the brand. My wife asked me, should I go get them? I'm like, hell no. If I can't handle the pain, I'll eat an aspirin. And they were writing these scripts out for people who had their wisdom teeth pulled, or dental work. So it's like the middle class. The middle class gets on the heroin, on these pills, and the doctors are writing renewal scripts until probably for half a year or a year, until they get afraid that they may get caught, because they're getting kickbacks off of this. And then they tell the druggie, who's a middle class guy, that hey, you've got a problem. You need to go check yourself in. And these people mostly are going to the street and buying heroin now. Some of which was laced, by the way, with crack. That's another favorite of a lot of drug dealers. But once the Taliban took over, why did fentanyl come in? And fentanyl is not a new drug. But why did fentanyl come in so hard is because the heroin dried up. Because the Taliban came in and they burnt the fields. And now they're growing wheat or other consumer crops, corn, etc. They're not growing poppies. And heroin, the only place in Afghanistan that's still growing poppies is the Panhandle up northeast, and those are held by a guild that the U.S. brought in, and it's backed by some mysterious forces. They're holding out. It's surrounded by a mountainous area, so there's only a few passes, and they're holding those passes. And they're still growing poppies up there, exporting morphine and heroin. Well, in the U.S., it all dried up, and in comes fentanyl. And fentanyl, yeah, has a big splash. Because, one hit wonder and you're hooked. And sooner or later, it does have a little problem that people OD on it a lot faster than they OD on even the really clean heroin. So, but, the druggie population doesn't get too big. It kind of self-corrects. But it earns a lot of money. A lot of money. There was a good PBS program I listened to about 20 years ago. I guess about 18 years ago. I was in Houston. And they hit it on the spot. Even they are occasionally correct. They said, why the U.S. border police, that is the sheriff deputies in these small towns, not stop inflow of drugs? Oh, it's quite simple, actually. It's money. It's all about money. When the drug dealer comes in, okay, so he gets caught. The drugs get burned. A cop may get his photo in the paper. And they the police get 80% of the value of whatever property was used in the criminal act. So they get a car. They get probably an old car, maybe a pistol and some old clothes. That's nothing. Now, they stop one or two of these drug dealers leaving the U.S. when he's got bags full of cash in his trunk. One or two stops like that, and they fill up their budget. A couple more stops, and they're getting bonuses. So the whole incentive program is very much so against the average U.S. citizen. It's set to make sure the drugs keep flowing. And that's the whole problem in the U.S., top to bottom. The U.S. government doesn't really mind. I mean, really, let's talk reality. As long as there are drugs, demand for drugs, there will be suppliers of drugs, and that gives them an excuse to go into various countries like Venezuela, that also has gold, that has diamonds, oil, biggest reserves in the world, and try to set up their own people or try to basically raid and rape. The U.S. government is good at that. The U.S. government is the main brake on the development of Latin America and has been acting like that for years. Look up Operation Condor while we're at it. Never mind all the other interventions, if you want to call them that. They are the curse of Latin America. So we see this. We see this. I mean, the force that's there isn't big enough to overthrow the Venezuelan government. That's obvious enough. That's 4,500 Marines. I mean, okay, so they'll grab a beachhead and then what? However, if they're making deals with some general, and Latin America has this bad tendency of generals taking power. You see, we Slavs, but the Eastern Slavs, we don't have that. So the people are waiting, the military in Ukraine will rebel and take power. No, they won't. Because they're Russians in the end. They don't want to understand that anymore. And there's certain cultural norms we just don't have. We don't have generals taking over. And before you tell me Admiral Kolchak left the military and became a politician when he became dictator of Russia, well, in Siberia, the recognized government in Russia, and the Russian Civil War. Even though the U.S. oligarchy was supporting Lenin. Lots of good books on that. If you want to look up, the great archival books are by Anthony Sutton. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and Wall Street and the Nazis, the rise of the Nazis. They're just two excellent books. Everybody needs to read those. And the Red Republicans while you're at it. That's a third really good book on that. A lot of this. So anyways, so that's what we have. We have the U.S. government, which lives and dies by drugs. And the first and foremost are going to get pistol whipped by those drugs are its own people. And it doesn't mind. The elites do not mind. Just like they don't mind that there are 350,000 missing children cases, which is insane. And that's not counting the illegal kids that go disappearing or go disappearing from their home countries, wind up in the U.S. or their bodies wind up in the U.S. What have you. So yeah, that's what you're dealing with. So when you're looking at these people that are running Washington, and you're expecting what? That they're going to end wars, they want world peace, they want stability, and they want their own people to be prosperous? No. No, not at all. Just look at who rules you. Look at who they are. Diddy and all those others. Epstein. I mean, these Diddy, Epstein they fill a niche for the elite's elite. So they're allowed into these lower rung of elites. They fill a niche. And so do the drug dealers, or the pharmacists as they're called now. That's how it is. That's the country that is the Americas. The Confederacy tried to rebel against that, try to separate, because they wanted to go back to what it was supposed to have been. They were crushed in the end. And after that pretty much that was it. And Washington really, really took off by then. So anyways, my pizza's ready. I'm going to run. God bless. Leave some comments. We'll talk. Cheers.